Hello and welcome to Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. I'm Becky Parker Geist and I'm your host. Audiobook Connection is your place to learn about the audiobook creative process in discussions between the authors, narrators, producers, and post-production teams that bring them all together, as well as guests who have listened to the audiobooks and have questions for the creative teams. This podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. And today I have with me John Byrne-Barry, author of Pirates of Sausalito, Houseboat Wars Murder Mystery. John, welcome.
Arg! Hi.
That's a perfect way to sign in here.
There are not real pirates in the book, but people who I would call self-proclaimed pirates. None of the people actually rob ships.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that's probably...
But they got the pirate swagger.
Got the pirate swagger, yeah. And actually, in the real world, there were some people in the world this is based on who did wear pirate gear and walked around with parrots on their shoulders.
Yeah. There are a couple different aspects of this project, and so I'm going to briefly mention what those are, and then we'll go into the two different areas. But one is, I just want to talk to you more about kind of the writing itself and the book and how it all began, and then also talking about the audiobook production. John and I, for our listeners, we were the two voices on that audiobook. So we did it as a full cast project, full cast being just the two of us me playing all the female roles and John playing all the male roles. And so we had a blast doing this, and I'd like to dive into that a little bit later in the podcast. But tell us a little bit about the inception of this project. What's the origin story of Pirates of Sausalito?
Well, I never set out to write a novel. I was curious about the houseboats. I live about a mile north of where many of them are. They're very bourgeois and lovely right now, but back in the 70s and earlier than the 70s, they were more like a shanty town. And I'd learned a little bit about that history, but I didn't really think that much of it. But I'm in this theater group, the Tam Valley Players. It's a community theater group that I've been part of for 9+ years. And we do murder mystery dinner theaters. So we get people, about 100 people at tables of 10, and they watch this show. And about 75% of the way, 80% of the way through the show, we stop and we have someone go out in the audience and say, okay, every table, pick a table captain and tell us who your table decided, who done it, and why. And then we finish the play and reveal who actually did it. So I had written one before, and in early in 2020, after we did our 2020 show, I pitched the idea of doing a murder mystery set during the houseboat wars in the late 70s, because it was a very colorful time. The counterculture was in full flower, and it was something that was on the TV news back then. I found clips of that. So it was a big deal. It was on the front page of the San Francisco Chronicle. So I suggested that and did a little research, but this community theater group, we're not doing Shakespeare. We're doing community theater. We're doing it for laughs. So it was a comedy. That was the intention. And the problem is that I wrote this script that I was pretty happy with, and I finished it in about July of 2020. And by then the pandemic was happening. And the idea of live theater, we had no idea when we might do it. So that was when I came up with the idea of, there's a lot of good stuff here. Let me turn it into a novel, which is a lot harder than maybe I anticipated, because I'm pretty good at writing dialogue, and a play is all dialogue, but then you have to get into the inner voices of people, et cetera, et cetera. But we eventually did do the play. By then I'd probably written the first draft of the novel. We did a play. I directed it and we performed it that would be March of 2023. And then once that was over, I took a couple hours off, and then I proceeded to try to finish the book and all that. So
couple hours.
No, more than that. Yeah.
Well, that's so cool. And during that process, one of the things that you do as an author, which I think is a very smart practice, I know we talk about this, BAPA, Bay Area Independent Publishers Association, which is you get beta readers.
Right.
And
you being
for our
one
listeners, I got to be one of the beta readers, and I was so happy to do it. And when in reading it, to me, it was just like called out to be a full cast audiobook. Just really felt like it would be such a fun project.
Well, can I talk for a second about just the whole beta reader part of it? Because I was very happy with the play. It was silly, ridiculous, way over the top. We got a lot of laughs. We had some crises with people getting COVID. We had to postpone anyway. But it turned out, I thought it was an artistic success, if you want to call community theater art, which let's just say for the moment it is.
Sure.
But a novel is a whole different beast. And one of the things that the beta readers said, many of them, some in very blunt detail, was, hey, you go to see a show, it's Saturday night, you've had a glass of wine, you just want to relax and you don't care if everything's over the top, you just want to have a good time. But a novel is a different kind of commitment. One, laughing at something in a crowd, that's fine. But you read a book by yourself, the humor doesn't work the same way, and the cartoonishness of the characters had to be tamped down. That was a struggle for me to do that during the process of writing, as well as once I got the beta feedback and saw how many people said roughly a similar thing, which is that some of the characters are just too cartoonish and you need to give them a little bit more depth. And I'd like to believe that I did that to a certain degree. I didn't change the story, but I made some of the characters gave them a little bit more depth. And the way I did that, and I've talked about this with a bunch of people, and I think it works pretty well, is that I gave them a few moments here and there of paying attention to someone else and having empathy for another character, because that makes them seem a little bit less self-centered. If you're thinking about someone else and how they are feeling, it makes the character seem like, oh, they're not just a self-absorbed idiot. And it also can enrich the other characters as well. And I probably did that 50, 60 times throughout the book, but didn't take that much space. Sometimes it took 5 paragraphs, sometimes it took 2, sometimes it was a half a page. I don't have any control group to say you did much better than this other one. Maybe someday I will. Anyway, I'm pretty happy with it. I'd like to believe I improved it by 10%, which is, 10%. That's good enough for an ad. The Pirates of Sausalito, 10% improved from beta version.
I think it's a delightful story. I really do. And that the characters are fun. And I liked the depth that you created for them, so that like Fenton Felton, who's did I get his name right?
Felton is the
sometimes I would switch as the Fenton and the Felton around.
the greedy developer villain. And
because it seemed like he was the one that would, most jumped off the page as a cartoon character.
Right.
But he has his moments, where you go, oh, that's why he decided to go that way, some of it being conscious choice on his part.
Right. Well, he had an ex-wife and a mistress, and some people said, well, if he's that much of an asshole, why would they be interested in him? You got to show him having a little bit more substance, or at least a history of that. I mean, some people can be very good at wooing women, and then as soon as they got them, then they just ignore them. So that was sort of where I went with that.
Yeah, that's fun. Well, let me ask this. So as you were developing the novel, had you already thought about putting it into audio, since you had the experience of the play already?
Yes, I did. And partly because it was all dialogue, and because even in the novel, it's very dialogue heavy. There's not a lot of long descriptions, and it does move fast. As a matter of fact, one of the things I learned from beta readers is that perhaps I sacrificed depth for pace, because I wanted it to be a fast-moving book. No beta reader said it moved too slow. Everybody said, yeah, it was a page turner. So I think what I did is I put a little more in so that there was a little bit more depth. But yeah, I think I did, because the audiobook experience is more like reading than seeing a play, because when people see a play, other people are there, people are applauding or laughing or whatever, and people don't necessarily do that with an audiobook. But the opportunity to deliver the lines, I mean, actually, one of my memories, one of the people in the cast who was a relatively new actor and had a lot of stage presence, I would have delivered some of the lines differently. I thought he could have gotten more laughs as a result of it. But anyway, so there's still jokes throughout the piece. So I wanted to do them in a way that you would, it's just easier to do them verbally. Not verbally. What's the right word? Audioly?
Yeah. Auditory.
So someone can hear them as opposed to read them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So yes, I did think about that, but I had not done it. And I certainly didn't anticipate that you would suggest that I be one of the two narrators, but I really enjoyed doing it. And one of the things I was most worried about, which I feel as if I managed okay, was being able to have different voices for the different characters. I've been an actor for a long time, but I've usually only done one role at a time as opposed to 5 or 6.
Right. Yeah. And I want to come back to that in a moment, but I know that there was some word wrestling with the title. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, the play was called Sausalito Houseboat Wars Murder Mystery. And part of that was just, I wanted it's set in Sausalito. It's about Sausalito. It's a mile from here. But I wanted to create a little distance and create that, I don't know, just didn't use the exact words. I used other words. For example, there's a bar in Sausalito called the No Name Bar. And I changed that to the bar whose name we dare not speak. And it's not the same place, but people think, oh, that's the... So at any rate, many people urged me to use the name of Sausalito instead of this fake name. And my beta title was The Pretend Pirates of Sausalito, because this main character, Honest, is definitely a pretend pirate. He's acting as a pirate. He's acting as a clown to get attention from the TV cameras for their cause. And it works. But he's also sort of ridiculous. And his girlfriend calls him a pretend pirate. Other people call him a pretend pirate. But I just decided it was better without the pirates. Actually, Becky mentioned BAPA before, Bay Area Independent Publishers Association. And I brought in the title to BAPA for what we call 5-minute feedback and got some feedback on what I should use. And that was, I don't remember exactly if that was the deciding thing or not, but I did end up with Pirates of Sausalito instead of The Pretend Pirates. Actually, yeah. Whether to use the or not was something we had a discussion about. Is it better The Pirates of Sausalito or Pirates of Sausalito? And I decided, I don't even remember who made the decision to leave the out. So
yeah.
But titles are hard things. I often will have a working title for several years, and then as it gets closer to publication time, it's like, oh well, is that the title I want?
Right. Yeah. And subtitles are so important.
Right.
They tell us a lot.
Yes.
Yeah.
I wanted to get the Houseboat Wars in. A lot of people around here know what the Houseboat Wars are, but many people don't. And the idea of Houseboat Wars, what does that mean? The basic story just is that in the 1970s, from the post-World War II into the 70s, people started building houseboats on this place that it used to be a ship factory during the war, and there was no regulation. There was no building codes, fire codes, sewage codes, things like that. So it was a lot of anarchy for many, many years. And finally, in the 60s and 70s, the authorities and the developers said, hey, there's some valuable land here, and these people are just dirty hippies living without, sewage hookups. We need to evict them and all that. Well, that's the story. The book is based on real events. And in fact, a lot of the events in the book did happen, but I made up all the characters. So it's mostly fiction in that regard.
Let's take a short pause. We'll be right back. Imagine Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test meets Murder, She Wrote. One part hippies grooving on the waterfront and fighting the man, one part murder mystery. It's the 1970s, and the houseboat wars erupt in Sausalito on the site of Marin Ship, the abandoned World War II shipyard. Hippies and squatters are living free and easy on houseboats in a ramshackle shantytown, and greedy developers are determined to evict them and build new docks to attract affluent residents. The counterculture is in full flower, and the houseboaters, fearing their community will be destroyed, resist eviction with street theater, civil disobedience, monkey wrenching, and more. Like climbing into dinghies and pushing away police boats with oars, like sinking a barge to block a pile driver, all in front of TV cameras. Then, someone gets stabbed. Pirates of Sausalito is fiction, but inspired by true events. As Larry Clinton, former president of the Sausalito Historical Society, said, "If it didn't happen exactly this way, it could have." Get your copy of Pirates of Sausalito, Houseboat Wars Murder Mystery by John Byrne Barry at amplifyaudiobooks.com. And we're back. Well, let's talk a little bit about the audiobook production aspect. So I know that you had, we had that conversation about how to manage two things, both managing cost and then also, would it work for you to take on that role of, being the other voice?
The jury is still out on that. I have not listened to the final.
Well, I enjoyed it. So the way that we ended up doing it, of course, allowed me to both be in the performance as well as directing it, providing a greater support for you as actor in the project. So tell our listeners about what that experience was like for you in those recording sessions.
Well, I had read out loud every chapter in the book because I'm in a writing group that meets on Zoom, and we put the documents, the chapter or whatever, on the screen, and then we read it out loud. We used to just read it out loud when we met in person in the library a long time ago in the pre-pandemic era. But now we read it out loud, even though it can also be read. And so I'm used to reading dramatically, but what we did during the audiobooks, which was new, is, I would read a line and then in the character's voice, and then the he said or she said would be in the voice of the narrator of that chapter. And that took a little getting used to. And also what took a little getting used to was having two male characters having a conversation with each other when they had different voices. But, that main thing was just to pay attention and make sure that I shifted back and forth. And I did have some relatively simple ways of distinguishing characters. Fenton Felton was, throaty and bombastic. "Get those houseboaters out of my marina now!" And one of the other characters, Honest, the pirate, the pretend pirate, I did that more in my own voice and all that. And some of the other ones more nasal. A newscaster named Johnny Dash, and I sort of did a Howard Cosell. "This is Johnny Dash reporting live from Sausalito." I don't know if people recognize that as Howard Cosell, but that's what I hear when I'm saying it. Yeah. And that made it a lot easier to distinguish from the others. But there were some small parts where the character was just in one chapter for a page or two where I sort of had to wing it a little bit. But I don't think anybody's going to be studying it that closely.
Yeah. One of the things that you brought up is a nice point for any authors who are narrating their own fiction is the way that you are thinking about, that you were thinking about, like basing a character on someone that you already know, or that you know how they speak. So it could be a famous figure. It could be also, and we had talked about this, prior to the actual recording sessions, or basing it on someone you know personally, be like your mom or your brother, or those kind of folks, that any voices that you know well that are kind of distinctive can really help set us up for success when we are trying to develop those different kinds of characters. All right. And then prior to the recording session, you worked with one of our home studio consultants. Tell us a little bit about what they did with you and how that worked out.
Well, I now have a professional mic set up, and if everybody and their brother wasn't already doing podcasts and I didn't have a lot of other things to do, I'd like, oh, well, now I can do that too.
That's right.
And just learning how close to be with it. I've done a variety of things with lecterns and regular microphones, so I know to speak into it like it's an ice cream cone and not be too close to it and watch about popping my peas. But this thing has a little, what do you call it, baffle or something?
Pop filter.
Yeah, to help with that. no, that process, that all went very smoothly. And right now we're recording and I can see the level over here on the right. And I'm supposed to be between about 12 and 20 or something like that, 12 and 30. That's what it looks like most of the time. So I guess I'm doing okay. And occasionally during the recording, I would get too loud and we would have to re-record something because what happens then? It just flattens out or something.
So if you peak, so if you get too loud, you're actually hitting that peak, and then it sounds distorted.
Well, maybe I think I might have done that during Fenton Felton's maniacal laugh. Yeah, yeah, it did peak a little there.
Yeah. So when you, so as we headed into that session, those first recording sessions, you were all set up and knew how to manage, right? Okay. What would you say is your next, what's your aspiration going forward with this book, or what's coming up next, or kind of what are you working on next?
I'm in a writing group and we read something almost every session. There's one tomorrow and I have not read something for a while. So I have started writing something else. It's not well formed enough to want to share here at this point where I've just finished a book, I need to spend a certain amount of time marketing and getting the word out. Is very challenging, despite all these classes, all these workshops and presentations we've received through BEPA. It's not easy to get attention for anything these days. But I remind myself that the writing itself, or in this case, the audiobook performing itself, is the important thing. I'm retired. This is not something I'm going to quit my day job in order to do full time, because I don't have a day job anymore. Well, I am a crossing guard, but it's summertime. So I'm back to writing again, and I was on vacation recently and I probably wrote 30 pages of notes. So that's an exciting thing. One of the things I like about writing is having this imaginary fictional world in my head, so that I can be taking a shower and I'll be thinking, oh, what if I have so-and-so say to so-and-so? And I could be walking down the street and essentially having the dialogue between two characters. I just sort of talking to myself and have that imaginary life is, it's nice to have. I mean, you don't want to have your whole life be imaginary, but having that be part of my life is fun. And I also like, while I'm writing, to be reading, listening to audiobooks, watching, movies and TV shows, because the whole process of creating is always derivative. There's formulas for stories, and everybody who tells a story has to have, there's conflict. You have to have conflict and resolution, and then your protagonists have to keep getting into trouble. I remember one of the best pieces of writing advice I got was you get your protagonist stuck up in a tree and then you throw rocks at him or her for the rest of the book. So you have to keep coming up with complications that keep creating tension and conflict. The combination of listening to sometimes I'll be listening to one book, reading another book, watching something on some streaming service, and writing my own book. And there's so I'm not saying maybe I am borrowing here and there, or I'm thinking, oh, that one character over there, maybe I can turn that person into this person. So I definitely am using the real world and the fictional world and my own imagination in weaving all that together.
Sounds like they provide fodder and inspiration.
Right. So anyway, we'll see how long I keep doing this, but I'm going to work on, will be my 5th novel, and I'm going to finish that.
But
great. It might take 3 or 4 years, because that's about how long most of the time it takes.
Yeah. And I know that you also do presentations to writing groups on.
I've done, most recently what I did was, I did one on how to write blurbs, but the presentations I've done recently, and this is sort of interesting because I didn't plan this. I knew I'd have the book done my deadline was this spring. So last fall, I talked to a librarian at the Mill Valley Library where I live, and said, this was when I was already doing a presentation. I was part of a panel about writing about California. So I suggested maybe I could do this talk. It's about the houseboat wars in Sausalito. So that worked out fine, except what she did is she hooked me up with the Mill Valley Historical Society, and they wanted me to talk not about my book, but about the real history the book is based on. And part of me is like, oh man, the research I did, I never thought about, well, I didn't need to be historically accurate. I was going for laughs. I was going for entertainment. So I had to sort of go back to my research again, figure out what was true and what wasn't true. But fortunately, the real story is also pretty interesting. And I had, not only did I have photographs, slides that I could use, I got permission to use from people who were there. Actually, one of the presentations I did at the Sausalito Library, and I had this photo of this guy named Donlin Arquez, who was the guy who bought this property from Bechtel after the war, after the ship factory closed down. And I said, well, some of you might have met him. And one of the people in the audience says, I took that picture.
Wow.
I did know that I didn't know he was there because I invited him. He was the photographer who gave me permission. I remember that it was his photo. But I also had news clips from the 1970s from YouTube of Dave McElhatton. We have a report from the Sausalito today. Where are the houseboaters? Or Dennis Richmond. I don't know if you remember those people, Dennis Richmond and Dave McElhatton. Did you live here in the Bay Area?
I remember David McElhatton.
Yeah. So that was great too, because those were real video clips of the altercations between the police and the houseboaters in that period of time. And I'm not sure what your question was.
I think I was asking about you doing presentations for writers groups.
Yes. So I ended up doing 3 presentations that were 90% about what really happened and 10% about my book. And I quite enjoyed that. And I do enjoy giving presentations. And so I'm going to try to do more of that. And I figure, well, people are interested in the book, they can get the book. And I still did read, 2 brief sections at the end of the presentation, but I spent most of the time talking about what really happened. But yeah, I like getting up in front of people. And it's a good balance between sitting in front of a computer for hours every day, which is, I'm not doing that right now, but when I'm in the thick of it, I am, or I should be anyway.
Right, yeah.
And some of that time I'm writing too.
Yeah. If you want to tell our listeners what your website is, so
my
they can
website
learn more about
is John Byrne-Barry, JohnByrne.com. And my email address is johnbyrnebarry@gmail.com. Brief story about my my name and website. Do I have a copy of it here? Well, this is not audio. This is not video anyway. But one of my books, my second book was called Wasted, Murder in the Recycled Berkeley Yard. And when I gave a talk on that, I was introduced by my friend who said, John Byrne-Barry is uniquely qualified to write this book because 2 of his 3 names are ways of disposing of waste, Byrne and Barry. The other 2 being recycle, compost. And then someone in the audience raised their hand and said, I believe that John is also a well-known way of disposing of waste. So that's just a way to remember my name, John Byrne-Barry. 3 ways of disposing of waste. But this book, and in fact, this book is also partly about disposing of waste because one of the reasons that the public officials went after the houseboaters was because they did not have legal sewage hookups and were not meeting the sewage codes. There's a little bit of...
your parents were not thinking about that when they named you, though. I hope.
No, they weren't, because my Byrne, B-Y-R-N-E, is my mother's maiden name. That was that's what they were thinking. But my dad was an English professor, and he died when he was 63. So it's been a long time now. But and he wrote poetry and he wrote scholarly works, and I really wish he were around because he would be very amused by the the stuff I'm doing and entertained by it.
Yeah. Well, I also want to let our listeners know that your audiobook is available on Amplify Audiobooks, and that is the best place to get the audiobook. Amplify Audiobooks is a platform that is more supportive to the authors, the content creators, the rights holders. So,
and the website for that is?
AmplifyAudiobooks.com.
Okay.
Yeah. So thanks, everyone, for listening. And John, thank you so much for being with me today.
Okay. Thanks. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us for Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. Please take a moment to subscribe at audiobookconnection.com. The podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Learn more at proaudiovoices.com. Again, thanks for being with us, and please join us next week.